Hi everyone. I chose to do my poem presentation on Sagawa Chika because I am very interested in Asian culture and Sagawa Chika is from Japan. So when Dr. Brown was helping me find a poet for this project and she suggested Sagawa, I was immediately drawn to her because she works in free verse, and I have to admire anyone who writes in free verse because that work is very subjective and you never know how your audience will react to it. And so, more than anything, I feel that it's one of the most personal ways to write, and there's really no boundaries to what you can do because you don't have to follow a structure. And another thing that made me so interested in Sagawa was that she died at a very young age, at age 24. So I wanted to find out what she accomplished in 24 years of living. And also, just people who die young tend to have a really unique perspective on life. So I hope that this presentation gives you a good idea of her work and the world in which she lived. So in my research, I found limited information on Sagawa Chika's life, but what I did find is that she was born as Kawasaki Aiko in 1911 in Hokkaido, Japan. And Hokkaido is the northernmost part of Japan, a very rural area, but she used the pen name Sagawa Chika, of course, and she died of stomach cancer at the age of 24. But she was always described as being very frail and unhealthy throughout her life. She moved to Tokyo, Japan when she was around 17 years old to live with her older brother, who was also a poet and editor, and in Tokyo is where she completed most of her work and had much of it published. A good way to describe Sagawa Chika's poetry is non-traditional because she wrote in free verse, not haiku or tanka. She's also considered avant-garde because she defied conventions over time and place. And Sagawa's work uses unique imagery with Western influences and has been described as resulting in short, sharp, surreal poems about human fragility and the beauty of nature. I can attest to this because in the poems that I read of Sagawa, there's a darkness to them, but they're also relatively short and usually don't exceed more than 10 lines. So I think a good poem of hers that represents this definition is Green. It reads, "From the morning balcony, rushing in like a wave, flooding all over the place, I nearly drown upon a mountain path and choke, many times bracing myself from falling forward." One of the events in Japanese history that I believed may have inspired Sagawa Chika's writing is the Great Kanto earthquake that struck Tokyo 5 years before she arrived there. Here in the top picture, you can see all the devastation and destruction that earthquake caused, and it even moved one of their great Buddha statues, which was 84 tons. It shifted it 3 feet from where it was. So this caused a lot of destruction within Japanese landscape and their cultural past, and kind of allowed for Western influence to develop there through their art, design, and literature. And here in the bottom picture, you can see young people sort of embracing that change. And I think that Sagawa Chika did that through her writing. Sagawa Chika was affiliated with a lot of other poets. A lot of them she met through her brother. She was a member of the R.E.L Club, an avant-garde poetry club, and a lot of her work was featured in the club's publication, Madame Blanche. She was also involved in Shitu Shiran, Poetry and Poetics, whose poets were collectively known as L'Esprit Nouveau. And a lot of the Japanese poets of this time were influenced by French modernism, which leads me to believe that at that time French poetry was also very prominent. So as I mentioned before, Sagawa was very involved in her poetry community, had a lot of poetry friends, including 2 women who were known for their openly erotic sexual poetry that embraced their bodily connection to the world. So I find it interesting that Sagawa doesn't really seem to have an inclination to write about sexuality. In fact, the woman who translated Sagawa's poems from Japanese to English calls a lot of her work asexual. Sagawa was also known for translating a lot of Japanese literature into English, or vice versa. That includes Joyce's Ulysses and work by Virginia Woolf, Charles Resnikoff, Harry Crosby, and Mina Loy. So despite that she did have the ability to translate the literature, all of her personal poetry was written in Japanese and, of course, translated many, many years later. She was also licensed to be an English teacher and just overall described as being a very intelligent person. So Sagawa was sometimes critical of her peers, and in this statement or poem, it reads, "Had they been the eyes of fish." I suspect that most poems are written with whatever random thoughts occur to the poet. In some cases, that's fine, although poems like that are already ruined. They are banal and have a short lifespan. So here we see that Sagawa Chika is very passionate about poetry and is upset when other poets do not establish their own unique voice and sort of hop on bandwagons or follow whatever's trendy. So the woman Nakayusu, who translated Sagawa's poetry into the collection of poems that we have today in English, praises her for sticking to her craft while still being exposed to all these other influences. Samples of Sagawa's poetry feature unique female perspective, such as in Glasswing. It reads, "People carefully pass along love held between glass wings, which the sun destroys on the street corner. The sky stands facing the window, darkening as the ventilator turns." So here we again see a lot of heavy use of imagery as well as symbolism. So the glass wings represent how fragile love is, and especially when it's shared and exposed to external forces, how easy it is to break and shatter. And of course, these are my own interpretations, but in a more general view, Nakayasu, the woman who's responsible for translating Sagawa's work, praises Sagawa and says that she didn't follow the typical themes of domesticity, sexual desire, or female lived experiences. This is a good example. Glasswing is of Sagawa's more dark perception of the world, and of course here of love. Some samples of Sagawa's poetry that illustrate the strong theme of death are presented in green. It reads, "From the morning balcony, rushing in like a wave, flooding all over the place, I nearly drown upon a mountain path and choke, many times bracing myself from falling forward. The city in my vision opens and closes, making my dreams spin, and in its pursuit, the men nearly collapse with tremendous force. I am abandoned." So here this is really powerful, and it sounds like the speaker is in imminent danger, not only from external forces like water, but also from their own weaknesses. So Nakasuya describes Sagawa's relationship to her own body as so torturous. Death is always looming in her work, and her physical existence in this world is precarious. One technique that is consistent throughout all of Sagawa's poetry is imagery. In the poem Like a Cloud, it reads, "Insects pierce green through the orchard, crawl the undersides of leaves, ceaselessly multiplying. Mucus expelled from nostrils may seem like blue mist falling." So in my own analysis of this poem, I came to conclude that Sagawa's work stands out because of her heavy use of imagery, which is so abstract at times that it becomes hard to define what images are used as metaphors or symbols and what is based on reality. This distortion makes it exciting to understand Sagawa's mind. Another theme that Sagawa uses a lot in her poetry is pain, and while a lot of people might argue that the theme of death is more powerful, I think that Sagawa's use of pain is just as powerful as that of death because of her experiences with it, of being in poor health for so much of her life. A good example of this is in the poem Like a Cloud, which reads, "Countless scars are attached to the sky, hanging like elbows, and then I see, the orchard cleaving from the center, a bare patch emerges there, burning like a cloud. So in my own analysis, I came to conclude that because Nakayasu experienced so much pain throughout her daily life, it's very possible that she felt just as strongly about pain as she did about death. You know, most people, death looms over them every day, but not everyone experiences pain so often. But here we get a good sense that she did suffer a lot from her health. And Nakayasu explained that bright green colors would be painful to her eyes. So that is why this theme occurs so much throughout her work and appears as imagery. One of my favorite techniques that Sagawa uses in her poetry is abyss and distortion. It's sort of hard to distinguish what she uses as reality and what's more dreamlike to her. And one of the lines that I like most is from Ribbon of May. It reads, I reach a hand into the darkness only to find a long wind of hair. So here again, Sagawa uses imagery to illustrate an eerie yet ethereal tone to express her understanding of the world and her own life. Sagawa Chika's last work were diary entries that she made while in the hospital dying of stomach cancer. It reads, It's a nice day. Just that simple fact makes me tear up in one eye. And there is nothing as painful as trying to eat breakfast. Of all of Sagawa's work, these simple lines are my favorite because given the context, it is easy to understand what she was feeling and still be able to express her emotions in a tragic, beautiful way. The juxtaposition of the start of a new day to the end of a life is a very powerful technique. Modernism in Sagawa's work was nearly forgotten after World War II, when a revival of haiku and tanka were forced on writers by nationalist organizations like the Togubetsu Koto Kisatsu, sometimes referred to as the Thought Police. Sometimes writers were even arrested for not complying with these organizations' demands. By chance, though, Sawako Nakayasu's translation of Sagawa's work nearly 60 to 70 years after her death has brought Sagawa recognition as one of Japan's most significant avant-garde writers. And now there's a publication of Sagawa's collected poems. And here, to the right, is the translator Sawako Nakayasu. Sagawa Chika is finally getting the recognition she deserves, even by Dr. Noriko Mizuta, the Chancellor of Japan's Josai University. He says, Here was a woman, fragile physically, who stood up alone, communicating with the universe.